Ladies and gentlemen, let us discuss something profoundly important. What happens when a woman realizes that the man she has invested her time, emotions, and energy in has lost interest? You see, relationships are deeply psychological. They are built on layers of trust, communication, and the subtle interplay of emotions. A woman, being biologically and psychologically attuned to human connection, is extraordinarily perceptive to changes in behavior. She will notice when the energy shifts, when the texts become shorter, the enthusiasm dwindles, and the attention she once received starts to fade. A woman doesn't need to hear the words to know what is happening. She feels it before it is ever spoken. Her intuition is not just a vague sense of unease. It is a finely tuned instrument, honed by millions of years of evolutionary necessity. Women have always needed to be attuned to shifts in behavior, changes in emotional climate, and the subtleties of human interaction, because throughout history their survival depended on it. She senses disinterest the way a wolf senses danger in the air. Instinctively, immediately, and with a precision that is difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. The energy shifts, and she perceives it before the man himself has even fully acknowledged his own withdrawal. The way he used to engage with enthusiasm is now replaced with forced effort. The way his words once carried warmth and sincerity now seem like obligations, lacking the depth they once held. His eyes no longer search hers for understanding. His laughter no longer comes from the same place. His presence feels more like an afterthought than a deliberate choice. She notices everything, she always has. A woman's ability to read micro-expressions, body language, and vocal intonation is unparalleled. It is not paranoia, it is not insecurity, it is biological intelligence operating at its highest level. She notices the way his responses grow colder, the slight hesitation before he answers, the delay in his messages, the absence of effort where once there was genuine interest. She catches the disconnect in his voice when he says, "I'm just busy," because she knows what busy sounds like when it is true, and she knows what busy sounds like when it is an excuse. The pain of realization does not come from mere detachment, it comes from betrayal of expectation. The expectation that what was once present would remain, that the interest she reciprocated was genuine and enduring, that the connection she nurtured was something worth maintaining. A woman's emotional world is built on trust. And the moment she detects a fracture in that trust, her mind races with questions. What changed? When did it change? Why didn't she see it sooner? But the truth is, she did. She just didn't want to believe it. She replays past conversations, searching for the moment it began. She looks for the first sign of disinterest, the first moment of emotional absence, the first shift in tone. And it was always there, wasn't it? Buried beneath the surface, masked by routine, hidden behind the pretense of consistency. But now, it is undeniable. His words feel scripted, his gestures feel mechanical, his presence feels hollow, and she cannot unsee it. It is not the loss of attention that wounds her, it is the lack of acknowledgement. A man who loses interest, but refuses to admit it, forces her into a silent war with her own intuition. She is made to doubt herself, to second-guess her observations, to wonder if she is overanalyzing. But she is not. Every fiber of her being screams the truth, and yet she is expected to ignore it. That is the cruelty of emotional neglect. It does not destroy her through confrontation, it erodes her through ambiguity. She notices that he no longer looks at her the same way. Once his eyes held admiration, curiosity, desire. Now they glance past her, barely landing long enough to make her feel seen. Once his hands reached for hers instinctively. Now they remain in his pockets, distant, detached. His words, once thoughtful, are now placeholders, filling silence rather than expressing meaning. Every interaction is laced with quiet withdrawal. Every conversation feels like a bridge to nowhere. And yet he says nothing. A woman is not irrational for seeking clarity. She is not too emotional for wanting honesty. Her instincts are not flawed, they are refined. When she asks, is something wrong, she already knows the answer. When she says, you seem different, she is giving him a chance to tell the truth. And when he denies it, when he dismisses her concerns, when he tells her she is imagining things, he is not sparing her pain. He is prolonging it. She watches as his enthusiasm diminishes, as his responses grow shorter, as his investment wanes. He does not touch her the way he used to. He does not engage with the same passion. The excitement that once existed between them has become obligatory, and she is left to wonder whether it was ever real at all. And yet he remains physically present, emotionally absent, a ghost of the man she once knew. The tragedy is not that he has lost interest. The tragedy is that he lacks the courage to admit it. He leaves her stranded in the limbo between what was and what no longer is, forcing her to navigate the slow decay of something she once believed in. She is not naive, she is not blind, but she is tired of pretending. A woman can tolerate many things, but she cannot tolerate being lied to, especially by omission. She cannot stand the insult of forced affection, the mockery of half-hearted attention, the humiliation of being strung along by someone who no longer sees her the way she sees him. If he no longer cares, she deserves to know. If he no longer wants to be there, he should have the decency to leave. Because nothing is more painful than watching someone who once held you with fire now hold you with indifference. She will ask herself if she is enough. She will wonder if she could have done something differently. She will cycle through every interaction looking for the exact moment where she lost him. But deep down she knows it was never about her. A man's loss of interest is rarely the result of something she did. It is a reflection of where he is, what he values, and what he chooses to prioritize. But that does not make the pain any less real. The worst part is the waiting for him to confirm what she already knows, waiting for him to finally say what his actions have been screaming for weeks, waiting for the moment where the truth is undeniable. And yet, he lingers, half in, half out, too cowardly to leave, too indifferent to stay. He is there, but not really, and she feels every inch of that distance. A woman does not react in anger because she is unreasonable. She does not cry because she is weak. She does not pull away because she is dramatic. She reacts because she has been forced to confront an unspoken truth. She grieves not just the man she is losing, but the illusion she once held on to. She distances herself not to punish, but to preserve what remains of her dignity. And when she finally walks away, it is not because she stopped caring. It is because she refuses to beg for someone who has already left in spirit. The saddest part is that he will not realize what he has lost until she is no longer there to offer it. Only in her absence will he understand what her presence truly meant. Only when she stops asking will he recognize the value of her concern. Only when she stops waiting will he feel the weight of her absence. Because while a woman may sense when a man has lost interest, he does not always sense when she has finally had enough. A woman's response to perceived rejection is not just an emotional reaction. It is an unraveling of everything she thought she knew. The moment she senses distance, something inside her shifts. It begins subtly, an unanswered message, a delayed response, an interaction that feels forced rather than fluid. But the weight of that shift grows heavier with each passing day until it becomes impossible to ignore. She notices how his energy has changed. She once felt warmth in his words, an eagerness in his presence, a certainty in his commitment. Now his tone is measured, his presence detached, his affection mechanical. It is not always what he says that gives it away, it is what he no longer says. It is the absence of enthusiasm, the lack of urgency, the way he engages only when necessary rather than because he wants to. Her mind races through the possibilities. Was it something she said? Did she miss a signal? Did she misread the entire relationship? The realization that someone is pulling away is more than just painful, it is disorienting. It forces her to question her own judgment, to doubt the moments that once felt so certain, to wonder if the connection she cherished was ever real to him at all. Confusion sets in before the sadness does. She replays conversations in her mind, analyzing every interaction, looking for clues. When did his eyes stop lighting up when he saw her? When did his words start carrying less weight? When did his hands stop reaching for hers with the same sense of belonging? There is no single moment, no obvious shift, just a slow erosion of what once felt unshakable. She tries to rationalize his behavior. Maybe he's stressed. Maybe he's just tired. Maybe it's all in her head. But she knows better. A woman who has experienced rejection before understands the pattern. She knows the difference between distance caused by circumstance and distance caused by disinterest. And this is not a temporary absence. This is a withdrawal. The pain does not just come from the fading connection, it comes from the uncertainty. If he would simply say the words, she could process them. If he would look her in the eyes and admit what she already knows, she could begin to heal. But he doesn't. He lingers in a space of half-hearted affection, keeping her close enough to pacify her, but distant enough to avoid true responsibility. And so she is left to suffer in silence, trapped between hope and reality. Anger is inevitable. Not because she is dramatic, not because she is unreasonable, but because rejection, especially unspoken rejection, feels like an assault on her dignity. She gave him access to her vulnerability, allowed him into the most sacred parts of her heart, and now he treats that access as an afterthought. He does not say, "I do not want this anymore." Instead, he simply stops showing up in the way that he once did. And that, in many ways, is more painful than outright rejection. She questions if she was ever enough. She wonders if she gave too much, if she loved too freely, if she miscalculated the depth of his feelings. She looks at herself in the mirror and sees not only her reflection, but her mistakes. Was she too available, too affectionate, too trusting? The irony is that she only blames herself because he will not take accountability for his own indifference. And so the weight of the failed connection rests entirely on her shoulders. There is a particular agony in feeling unwanted by someone who once made you feel chosen. The mind does not easily reconcile such a drastic shift. It tries to bridge the gap between past and present, to make sense of the sudden coldness where warmth once lived. She remembers the way he used to look at her, the way his voice used to soften when he said her name, the way his presence used to feel like home. Now she feels like a guest in the space where she once belonged. She tries to pull him back, not out of desperation, but out of a need for understanding. She asks, "Is everything okay?" knowing full well that everything is not. She seeks reassurance, not because she cannot exist without him, but because she wants to believe that she was not foolish for trusting him. But instead of honesty, she is met with indifference. Instead of clarity, she is left with vague dismissals. And with each unanswered question, her patience wears thinner. There are two kinds of women in these moments: those who fight for answers and those who silently withdraw. Some will argue, will demand truth, will refuse to accept the slow fade of something that once felt real. Others will shut down, refusing instead to let silence speak for them. But both are suffering. Both are processing the same pain. Both are watching something they once valued slip through their fingers, powerless to stop it. The most devastating realization is not that he has lost interest. It is that he does not respect her enough to say so, that he is comfortable letting her wonder, letting her struggle, letting her sit in the discomfort of uncertainty while he avoids the discomfort of confrontation. That, more than anything, is what breaks her. The knowledge that she mattered enough to hold, but not enough to be released with honesty. She begins to detach, but not all at once. At first, she still hopes. She still looks for signs that he cares, still clings to the rare moments of warmth, still waits for the man she fell for to return. But eventually something inside her shifts. The pain outweighs the hope. The disappointment outweighs the desire. The realization becomes heavier than the love. And that is when she begins to let go. She no longer asks where he is or why he is distant. She no longer tries to reignite a spark that he is unwilling to feed. She no longer waits for effort that is not coming. She stops chasing, stops pleading, stops making excuses for him, not because she no longer cares, but because she cares too much about herself to keep tolerating the slow destruction of her self-worth. A woman's love is not infinite when it is not being reciprocated. She can endure a lot, but she cannot endure feeling unwanted indefinitely. At some point, she will choose herself over the false hope of his return, and when she does, she will not look back. Not because she did not love him, but because she finally realized that she deserved more than his uncertainty. It will not be an easy process. The ache will linger. The questions will remain unanswered. The memories will still surface in quiet moments. But she will not stay where she is not valued. She will not waste her love on someone who treats it as disposable. She will grieve, but she will also rebuild. And one day she will wake up and realize that the pain is no longer consuming her. And by the time he realizes what he lost, by the time he looks for her and finds only the absence of what she once gave so freely, it will be too late. Because a woman who has felt the sting of rejection, who has battled her own doubts, who has survived the pain of unspoken goodbyes, she does not return to the place that broke her. She rises from it. She becomes stronger because of it. And she never again settles for anything less than what she deserves. The moment she realizes she is no longer wanted, something within her begins to fracture. It is not just heartbreak. It is a battle between her self-worth and the rejection that threatens to dismantle it. She does not simply feel sadness. She feels an unraveling, a deep and unsettling dissonance between what she believed was real and what she now knows to be true. A woman does not love lightly. When she gives herself to someone, she does so with the expectation that the connection is mutual, that the foundation is strong, that the effort is not one-sided. But when she senses withdrawal, when she feels the slow decay of interest, when she watches the man she cherished grow cold before her eyes, she is left in a war between her love and her dignity. She questions her worth in a way that is almost unbearable. The mind does not simply register rejection as a singular event. It rewires itself to try and understand why. She does not just wonder why he changed. She wonders if she was ever enough to keep him. She wonders if she was too much or not enough, if she loved too hard or held back too much, if she gave too freely or failed to give in the way he wanted. She searches for the fault within herself because that is the nature of the heart. It does not want to believe that someone could simply lose interest without reason. It would be easier if there was an explanation, if there was a mistake she could correct, if there was a way to undo whatever caused the distance. But when no answer comes, when the silence stretches on, when the lack of closure becomes louder than any words ever could be, she is left to battle the ghosts of what she thought was real. She looks at herself in the mirror and sees not only her reflection, but her failures. She traces the outlines of her own face, searching for flaws she never noticed before. She remembers the moments when he looked at her with admiration, when his touch was filled with certainty, when his presence felt like a promise. And she wonders if it was all in her head, if she saw something in his eyes that was never really there. Rejection is not just the absence of love. It is the destruction of certainty. It is the dismantling of every moment that once felt secure. It is the slow erosion of confidence, the whispering doubt that creeps into her mind, the quiet but persistent question of whether she will ever be enough for anyone. It is not just losing him, it is losing the belief that she was ever truly chosen. She replays their moments together, dissecting each word, each glance, each touch, searching for the moment when he started to drift. She tries to pinpoint the exact second his affection became obligation, the precise instance where his presence became a duty rather than a desire. But no matter how much she searches, she cannot find it. Because indifference does not announce itself, it seeps in slowly, quietly, until it consumes everything. The pain of rejection is not just about losing someone she loved. It is about the way it alters how she sees herself. It forces her to confront every insecurity, every fear, every hidden belief that maybe, just maybe, she is not worthy of lasting love. It makes her question if she was ever truly special or if she was simply convenient. She withdraws, not because she wants to, but because she must. The world feels colder, the air heavier, the light dimmer. She moves through her days with a weight on her chest, a silent burden that no one else can see. She smiles, she functions, she speaks when spoken to, but inside there is an emptiness where certainty used to live. She scrolls through old messages, reading words that once made her feel chosen, now tainted by the knowledge that they were temporary. She looks at old photos, seeing the reflection of a woman who believed she was safe, who believed she was wanted, who had no idea that soon she would be left to wonder if any of it was real. The world tells her to move on, to be strong, to forget the one who forgot her. But how does one forget a love that felt like home? How does one erase the memories that have carved themselves into her very being? How does one simply unlove someone who was once a part of her soul? She wrestles with the urge to reach out, to ask why, to demand an explanation, to plead for the closure she will never receive. But deep down, she knows that no answer will satisfy the ache. No words will undo the damage. No explanation will erase the nights spent wondering if she was simply not enough to keep his heart. The worst part is that he will move on with ease. While she drowns in unanswered questions, he will walk away unburdened, While she mourns the loss of something sacred, he will continue as if nothing ever changed. While she carries the weight of rejection like an anchor, he will float effortlessly into the arms of someone new. And that is the greatest betrayal of all, that the pain that shattered her was nothing more than a passing phase for him. But even in her suffering, something within her begins to harden. The woman who once gave love so freely, who once trusted so easily, who once believed in the permanence of affection, she begins to build walls where there were once open doors. She learns that love is not always enough to keep someone, that effort is not always reciprocated, that sometimes, no matter how deeply she cares, someone will still choose to walk away. She becomes more cautious, more selective, more guarded. She no longer falls for words, she watches for actions. She no longer believes in promises, she waits for proof. She no longer trusts blindly, she protects her heart with the wisdom of experience. She is no longer the woman who gave without hesitation. She is now the woman who measures, who is truly worthy of receiving her love. And when she finally rises from the ashes of rejection, she is not the same person who once begged to be chosen. She is not the same woman who questioned her worth based on another's inability to see it. She no longer seeks validation in the arms of someone who could not hold her with care. She no longer waits for explanations that will never come, because in the end, the pain of rejection does not define her. It refines her. It forces her to see herself beyond someone else's inability to love her. It teaches her that her worth is not determined by whether or not a man chooses to stay. It reminds her that the greatest love she will ever know is the one she learns to give herself. And when she finally learns this, when she stops seeking approval from those who were never meant to hold her heart, when she realizes that rejection was not a reflection of her shortcomings, but of their inability to appreciate her, she becomes unstoppable. She no longer begs to be loved. She no longer waits to be chosen. She no longer tolerates the bare minimum. Because the woman who has survived rejection, the woman who has faced the darkness of self-doubt and emerged stronger, the woman who has learned that her value is not dictated by another's interest, she is the woman who will never again settle for anything less than what she deserves. When a woman finally realizes she has been discarded emotionally, something in her shatters. But what follows is not just pain, it is a transformation. It is not a gentle process. It is not a peaceful evolution. It is a storm, violent and relentless, tearing through every illusion she once held. She does not simply walk away unchanged. She does not remain the woman she was before. She burns, she breaks, she rebuilds. There is a raw and unfiltered rage in being made to feel replaceable. It is a fury that does not scream. It simmers beneath the surface, tightening her jaw, hardening her gaze, forcing her to reconsider everything she once believed about love, about loyalty, about the weight of her own presence. She remembers every time she poured herself into him, every sacrifice made without hesitation, every moment she placed his needs above her own, only to realize that none of it was enough to make him stay. The betrayal is not just in his departure, but in the way he lingered while he was already gone. He kept her close enough to keep her hopeful, but distant enough to ensure he was no longer invested. He let her suffer in silence, watching her fight for something he had already abandoned. He allowed her to believe that if she just did more, just loved harder, just proved herself again, maybe, just maybe, he would return. But he never does, because his absence was not an accident, it was a choice. It was the slow, deliberate unraveling of his affection, the careful detachment of his once intimate gaze, the calculated distance of a man who no longer cared enough to fight. And when she finally sees this for what it is, when she finally understands that his silence is not confusion but certainty, something inside her turns cold. She no longer asks for explanations. She no longer begs for closure. She no longer looks for the man who was once so eager to hold her, because now she sees him for what he is, a man who was willing to watch her suffer and do nothing, a man who chose his own comfort over her pain, a man who was strong enough to love her when it was easy, but too weak to be honest when it was hard. She does not cry the way she used to. The tears do not come in waves of despair anymore. They are no longer the sobs of a woman desperate to be understood. They are silent, sharp, precise, like a blade cutting through the last remnants of what she once held sacred. She does not grieve his loss. She grieves the version of herself that believed in him. She watches the way he moves on, the ease with which he continues. the way he seems untouched by the devastation he left behind. And it does not make her want him back. It makes her realize she was holding on to a mirage. Because a man who truly loved her could not have left her in ruins without looking back. A man who valued her would have fought, would have explained, would have done more than simply fade into indifference. She does not forgive him, not yet. Because forgiveness is not something she owes to someone who did not even grant her the dignity of honesty. It is not something that comes quickly when the wounds are still fresh, when the echoes of his absence still linger in every room he once occupied. She is not weak for holding on to the anger. She is not bitter for feeling the sting of betrayal. She is human. But eventually the pain stops controlling her. She no longer wakes up wondering if he thinks about her. She no longer hesitates before saying his name. She no longer flinches at the sound of his voice in old recordings. The weight he placed on her heart begins to lift, not because he returned to fix what he broke, but because she stopped waiting for him to. She starts to see herself again, not through the lens of his disinterest, not through the reflection of his rejection, but through the undeniable truth of her own resilience. She is not the woman he left behind. She is not the girl who once clung to the hope that he would realize her worth. She is something else now, something sharper, something wiser, something untouchable. She no longer tolerates the bare minimum. She no longer accepts empty words. She no longer entertains men who treat love like an afterthought. She no longer settles for potential. She requires presence. She demands effort. She expects consistency. And if she does not receive these things, she does not argue, she does not chase, she does not lower her standards to accommodate someone else's inability to meet them. She simply walks away. The woman who once begged to be chosen no longer waits to be seen. The woman who once feared abandonment now chooses solitude over mediocrity. The woman who once measured her worth by someone else's attention now understands that the right person will never make her feel like she has to fight for a place in their life. And when he finally realizes what he lost, when he looks for her and finds only the space where she used to be, when he feels the absence of her love in ways he never anticipated, he will know that he made a mistake. But by then, it will not matter. Because the woman who has risen from rejection, the woman who has rebuilt herself from the wreckage of his indifference, the woman who has learned to love herself in ways he never could, she does not look back. A woman's realization that she is no longer valued is not just a moment of heartbreak, it is a moment of awakening. She enters the fire of rejection, but she does not emerge as ashes. She emerges as something untouchable, something stronger, something transformed. She learns that love is not about begging for attention, that true connection does not require suffering, that her worth is not dictated by the fleeting interest of a man who could not see her value. She does not wait for closure because she is not defined by someone else's inability to love her. She no longer chases, no longer pleads, no longer bends herself to fit into spaces too small for her soul. She rises, she reclaims, she redefines herself. Not as someone who was left behind, but as someone who now walks forward with absolute certainty in who she is. And when she finally understands that the love she was searching for must first come from within, she becomes a force that no one can ever take for granted again.